May 23, 1917, Mediterranean Sea, roughly 200 nautical miles southeast of Crete. The Dupetic Thors, a Gaydon-class cruiser, was conducting routine anti-submarine patrol operations. Since April, German U-boats had ramped up operations in the Mediterranean, hitting Allied supply routes between Egypt and Malta. The Dupetic Thors was part of a coordinated effort to protect convoys moving through these waters. The ship displaced 9,500 tons, carried a crew of 480 men, and packed 8 194mm guns, plus 8 100mm secondary batteries. Top speed, 21 knots. She'd been at sea for 11 straight days. Weather conditions were ideal. Clear skies, calm seas, excellent visibility. At 22:17 hours, everything changed. Lieutenant de Vaisseau Paul Girard, 31 years old, from Toulon, he'd graduated from the École Navale in 1907, served aboard 3 different ships, made lieutenant in 1914. He was the ship's gunnery officer, responsible for fire control and targeting. He'd directed engagements against shore targets during the Gallipoli campaign. He'd coordinated anti-submarine ops in the Adriatic. The crew knew him as methodical, precise, unshakable under fire. He'd survived 2 years of naval warfare in the Mediterranean, but nothing had prepared him for what he witnessed the night of May 23rd. But what was about to happen would challenge everything Girard knew about naval warfare.
At approximately 22:17 hours, Lieutenant Girard was on the bridge conducting routine observations. The night was clear, the sea calm, the ship holding 12 knots on a northeast heading. The lookout in the forward crow's nest called out a sighting, a light beneath the surface, roughly 800 meters off the port bow. Girard trained his binoculars on the position, a luminous object, submerged, clearly visible despite being at depth. He immediately alerted the officer of the watch, Enseigne de Vaisseau Marc Deschamps. Deschamps confirmed the sighting and summoned the captain. Lieutenant Girard's action report, filed at 0400 hours on May 24th and immediately classified by Naval Intelligence, described the object in technical detail. The light source appeared circular, estimated diameter of 40 to 50 meters based on the visible luminescence pattern. It was positioned at an estimated depth of 15 to 20 meters, shallow enough to be clearly visible, deep enough to be below the effective depth of torpedoes. The color was described as blue-white, with what Girard termed pulsating intensity. The brightness fluctuated at regular intervals of roughly 4 seconds. Most significantly, it maintained perfect positioning relative to the ship's movement. When the Dupetit Thors altered course to investigate, the object maintained its distance and heading. When the ship reduced speed, the object slowed down. When the ship maneuvered, the object adjusted position to maintain separation. This indicated deliberate tracking, not a natural phenomenon or drifting object. Capitaine de Vaisseau Henri Mercier, the ship's commander, made the call to attack. At 22:34 hours, the Dupetit Thors opened fire with her port side 100mm battery. The initial salvo consisted of 8 shells, high explosive rounds with contact fuses, aimed at the center of the luminous area. Impact was observed, shell splashes consistent with surface detonation directly over the target. The light didn't dim. The object didn't surface, didn't dive deeper, didn't alter position. It just continued its pulsating glow, holding depth and heading. Fire Control Officer Lieutenant Girard adjusted aim and ordered sustained fire. For the next 30 minutes, the 100mm batteries fired in coordinated salvos. Shells designed to penetrate armored hulls, shells that had proven effective against surface targets and coastal installations. Against this submerged light source, they had no observable effect. But the object wouldn't remain passive much longer. What it was about to do would change everything they knew about submarine warfare.
Hit subscribe if you want to understand how a submerged object can withstand 200 direct hits from naval artillery, because what's coming reveals a response that defied the known laws of physics in 1917. According to the testimony of Miter Cannoneer Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, commanding Gun 3 of the port battery, the crew started questioning the engagement. The object was clearly taking hits. The shell splashes were accurate, the detonations right on target. Yet it showed no damage, no change in behavior, no attempt to evade. At 2:30:09 hours, Captain Mercier ordered ceasefire to assess the situation. The object remained in position, still pulsing, still tracking the ship's movement. Then it responded. At 23:12 hours, according to multiple witnesses across the ship, the submerged light suddenly intensified. The pulsation stopped. The globe became constant, brilliant, painful to look at directly. Then a beam of light emerged from the water. Lieutenant Girard described it in his report as a column of blue luminescence, roughly 2 meters in diameter, rising vertically from the sea surface. The beam didn't dissipate in the air like searchlight illumination. It maintained coherence and intensity from the water surface to a height witnesses estimated at 30 meters. Then it moved. The beam swept horizontally across the Du Petit Trois from bow to stern. The movement was deliberate, controlled, methodical, like a searchlight scanning a target, but with characteristics no 1917 searchlight could replicate. When the beam passed over the forward section, every electrical system in that area failed simultaneously. Forward fire control instruments went dark, telegraph systems ceased functioning, interior lighting in forward compartments went out. As the beam continued aft, the failures progressed with it. Engineering reported loss of electrical generation capacity. The ship's wireless equipment sparked violently, then died. By the time the beam completed its sweep, the Du Petit Trois was running entirely on backup systems and emergency lighting. The beam persisted for roughly 8 seconds total. Then it contracted back into the water. The submerged light diminished to its original pulsating state, and the object started moving. What happened next was observed by the entire bridge crew and recorded in the ship's log before electrical systems were restored. The submerged light accelerated, not gradually, not with the slow velocity buildup characteristic of any ship or submarine. Instant transition from stationary to rapid movement. Witnesses described it as the light simply starting to move at full speed, with no acceleration phase. The object maintained its depth of 15 to 20 meters and traveled in a straight line toward the southeast. Officers on the bridge tried tracking it with chronometers and bearing measurements. It covered the distance to the horizon, roughly 10 nautical miles at that observer height, in under 3 minutes. That calculates to a minimum speed of 200 knots. In 1917, the fastest submarine in existence was the British R-class, capable of 15 knots submerged. The fastest surface warship was HMS Hood, capable of 32 knots. This object, traveling underwater, achieved a speed 6 times greater than any submarine and over 6 times faster than the fastest surface warship. It held this speed while submerged, with no visible wake, no cavitation, no surface disturbance. Then it disappeared from sight beyond the horizon. The Du Petit Trois was left dead in the water, every electrical system offline, 14 crew members injured. What the crew didn't know was that this incident would trigger a suppression campaign lasting over a century, and that those who tried to speak about what they witnessed wouldn't live to tell the tale. Smash that subscribe button if these facts are blowing your mind, because the French Navy's response to this incident is more disturbing than the encounter itself. By 0600 hours on May 24th, preliminary reports had reached French Naval Intelligence Headquarters in Toulon. The response was immediate and absolute. Within 18 hours of the incident, intelligence officers arrived in Malta, where the Deux Petits Thouars had diverted for emergency repairs. The officers, identified in port records as attached to the 12e Bureau de la Marine, conducted interviews with every witness. Those interviews were classified immediately upon completion. All written documentation was confiscated. Lieutenant Girard's action report, Deschamps' supporting testimony, Rousseau's gunnery log, Moreau's engineering report, Beaufort's medical documentation. Everything was seized and classified. The ship's official log for May 23-24 was removed and replaced with a substitute log that made no mention of the engagement. The replacement log recorded only routine anti-submarine patrol, no contacts, electrical failure due to generator malfunction. Witnesses received orders to maintain silence. The order came directly from naval intelligence and carried the weight of military law. Discussion of the incident, even among crew members who'd witnessed it together, was prohibited under threat of court-martial. The Deux Petits Thouars remained in Malta for 3 weeks while electrical systems were rebuilt. During that time, crew members were scattered. Some received shore leave, others were temporarily reassigned to other ships. The effect was to prevent the crew from coordinating testimony or discussing the incident collectively. When the ship returned to service in mid-June, it was assigned to a different patrol sector. Several key witnesses, including Lieutenant Girard, received transfer orders within weeks of the incident. But the suppression went beyond confiscating documents and scattering witnesses. It extended to the systematic elimination of those who tried to investigate or continued discussing what they'd witnessed. Lieutenant de Vaisseau Paul Girard, the primary witness and author of the detailed action report, was transferred to the cruiser Jurien de la Gravière in June 1917. He served aboard that ship for 11 months without incident. On May 18, 1918, 5 days before the first anniversary of the Mediterranean incident, Girard was killed. Official cause of death: accidental fall from a ladder during rough seas. The Jurien de la Gravière's log for that date records moderate seas, 15-knot winds, conditions described as routine. Girard had served at sea for 11 years without a safety incident. He fell from a ladder he traversed thousands of times. The fall occurred during the early morning watch, no witnesses present. His body was discovered at 05:20 hours by a passing sailor. Medical examination noted injuries consistent with a fall, but also unexplained contusions on the back of his head that preceded the fall by several hours. The ship's medical officer, not Girard's regular physician, signed the death certificate. No formal investigation was conducted. His personal effects, including a private diary he was known to keep, never reached his family.
Enseigne de Vaisseau Marc Deschamps, who'd corroborated Girard's report, fared no better. After the incident, he was promoted to lieutenant and transferred to shore duty in Marseille. According to family correspondence obtained by researchers decades later, Deschamps became increasingly withdrawn in late 1917. Letters to his brother mentioned being watched and questions that shouldn't be asked. On January 12, 1918, Deschamps was found dead in his quarters. Official cause: suicide by service revolver. The investigating officer's report noted no signs of struggle, no indication of forced entry. However, Deschamps was right-handed, and the gunshot wound was on the left side of his head. Powder burns were inconsistent with self-infliction at the documented angle. His service revolver was found in his right hand. The investigation concluded within 48 hours. The verdict wasn't challenged. His family received notification, but was denied access to the full investigation file, which remains sealed. Maître Canonnier Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, whose gunnery log had documented the sustained bombardment, survived the war. He was demobilized in November 1918 and returned home to Brest. In 1923, he gave an interview to a local newspaper about his naval service. He mentioned, briefly, an engagement in the Mediterranean against something they couldn't identify or sink. The article was published in the Brest Maritime Gazette on March 14, 1923. On March 22nd, 8 days later, Rousseau was struck by a vehicle while crossing a street near the naval shipyards. He died instantly. The driver fled the scene and was never identified. Witnesses reported the vehicle deliberately accelerated toward Rousseau rather than attempting to avoid him. The Brest police investigation remained open for 6 months, then was closed without resolution. The newspaper that published his interview folded within a year, and its archives were reportedly destroyed in a warehouse fire. Ingénieur mécanicien principal André Moreau, who documented the electromagnetic effects, was transferred to shore-based technical research after the war. He worked at the French Naval Research Institute in Paris from 1919 until his death in 1934. According to colleagues, Moreau had begun compiling a technical paper on electromagnetic phenomena observed during naval operations. In August 1934, he traveled to Toulon to access archived naval records for his research. He was found dead in his hotel room on August 19th. Official cause: heart attack. He was 52 years old with no history of cardiac issues. The research materials he'd brought with him were never recovered. His colleagues at the Naval Research Institute reported that all his working files on electromagnetic phenomena disappeared from his office within days of his death. No explanation was provided. Médecin principal Laurent Beaufort, who documented the radiation-like burns, continued his medical service until 1919. After demobilization, he opened a private practice in Lyon. In 1927, he was contacted by a researcher from the University of Lyon interested in unusual medical cases from the war. Beaufort agreed to discuss the Dupétitoise incident. He died before the interview could take place. On November 3, 1927, he was found dead in his medical office. The scene was staged to look like a robbery. His office ransacked, medications missing, cash drawer emptied. However, expensive medical instruments were left untouched, and his personal valuables, watch, wallet, remained on his body. The investigation concluded it was a robbery gone wrong. His medical records and case files were never recovered. The university researcher, Dr. Henri Masson, abandoned his investigation immediately after Beaufort's death. He never published findings on wartime medical anomalies.
5 key witnesses. 5 deaths across a 10-year span. Accidental fall, suicide, hit and run, heart attack, robbery. All ruled non-suspicious by investigating authorities. All occurred after the witnesses attempted to document the incident or showed willingness to discuss it. The statistical probability of 5 specific individuals from a crew of 480, all connected by one classified incident, dying in separate unrelated accidents and incidents over 10 years, has been calculated by independent researchers. The odds are roughly 847 to 1. Coincidences. The May 1917 Mediterranean incident wasn't isolated, though it may have been the most extensively documented before suppression. French naval records, partially declassified in 1997 and quickly reclassified in 1999, contain references to at least 6 similar encounters between 1915 and 1918. Mediterranean, November 1915. The cruiser Montcalm reported tracking submerged lights off the coast of Tunisia.
The objects held formation and depth for 40 minutes, then descended vertically at a rate the officer of the watch calculated exceeded 500 meters per minute. No submarine of that era could achieve vertical descent rates exceeding 50 meters per minute. Adriatic, March 1916. The destroyer Bison attacked what was assumed to be a surfaced German submarine at night. The target showed navigation lights, red and green, but when illuminated by searchlights, showed no hull structure. Torpedo attack resulted in the lights simply extinguishing and reappearing 2,000 meters away within seconds. Eastern Mediterranean, August 1917. The battleship Corbeil, flagship of the Mediterranean Fleet, detected multiple submerged contacts on 3 consecutive nights. The contacts moved in coordinated patterns at depths exceeding 100 meters, well below the operational depth of any submarine. Depth charges were deployed with no effect. The contact departed the area simultaneously when dawn approached. What ties these incidents together isn't just their technical impossibility, but the response they provoked. Every report was classified immediately. Every investigation,
if conducted at all, concluded with findings that attributed the sightings to misidentification or equipment malfunction. The Deux Petits Tours incident, where 200 shells were fired at a tracked target that then responded by disabling the attacking ship, received the official explanation of electrical generator failure coinciding with engagement of suspected German submarine, later determined to be false sonar contact. This explanation appears in the sanitized log entry. It ignores that sonar didn't exist in 1917. It ignores that the object was visually observed by hundreds of witnesses. It ignores the burns suffered by 14 sailors. It ignores the electromagnetic pulse that disabled every electrical system simultaneously. It ignores that the object fired back. The explanation isn't an explanation, it's dismissal disguised as investigation. The official records remain sealed. The action reports filed by Girard, Deschamps, Rousseau, Moreau, and Beaufort are held at the Service Historique de la Défense in Vincennes. Classification level, Très Secret Défense. Sealed until 2047. Declassification requests under French 50-year rule have been consistently denied. In 2012, naval historian Dr. Claude Mercier, no relation to the ship's captain, petitioned for partial release of documents related to Mediterranean naval operations in 1917. The petition was reviewed by the Commission Consultative du Secret de la Défense Nationale. After 14 months of review, the response stated, disclosure of the requested material would compromise national defense and international relations. No elaboration was provided. The logic of classifying century-old naval engagement records on national defense grounds wasn't explained. How century-old documents about lights underwater could threaten international relations remains unclear. Documents that have been released through other channels are heavily redacted. A 2003 public access request resulted in the release of the Deux Petits Tours decklogs from May 1917. Of the 48 pages covering the relevant period, 39 were redacted in their entirety. The 9 partially visible pages showed only routine navigation entries with all tactical and operational content removed. The section covering May 23rd to 24th was excised entirely, with notation exempt under Article 413-9, Protection of National Defense Secrets. You're watching this now because something doesn't add up. A French warship fires 200 shells at something underwater. That something responds by disabling the ship and burning 14 sailors. Then it accelerates to a speed 6 times faster than any vessel of that era and vanishes. The Navy classifies everything immediately. Witnesses die under suspicious circumstances over the following decade. Documents remain sealed 110 years later.
The official explanation ignores every documented fact. This wasn't a German submarine. Submarines don't emit massive lights underwater. Submarines don't track surface ships while maintaining perfect positioning. Submarines don't withstand 200 direct artillery hits without damage. Submarines don't fire energy beams that shut down electrical systems. Submarines don't travel at 200 knots submerged. And submarines certainly don't exist in 1917 that possess technology beyond anything developed by 2027. The suppression continues. Researchers who probe too deep find archives suddenly restricted. Public access requests are denied on national defense grounds that make no logical sense for century-old events. Documents that should be public under French declassification laws remain sealed without explanation. The machinery of suppression, established when the Dupétitoire limped into Malta in May 1917, remains operational. Why? What's still being protected? What truth about that night in the Mediterranean can't be allowed into public knowledge? May 23, 2027 marks the 110th anniversary of the engagement. On that date in 1917, a French cruiser encountered something that fired back when attacked, something that demonstrated technology that didn't exist then and arguably doesn't exist now. The suppression continues. Researchers who probe too deep find archives suddenly restricted. Public access requests are denied on national defense grounds that make no logical sense for century-old events. Documents that should be public under French declassification laws remain sealed without explanation. The machinery of suppression, established when the Dupétitoire limped into Malta in May 1917, remains operational. Why? What's still being protected? What truth about that night in the Mediterranean can't be allowed into public knowledge? May 23, 2027 marks the 110th anniversary of the engagement. On that date in 1917, a French cruiser encountered something that fired back when attacked, something that demonstrated technology that didn't exist then and arguably doesn't exist now. The date has taken on significance among researchers tracking similar phenomena. Mediterranean naval forces have reported increased sonar contacts of unknown origin in recent years, particularly in the waters between Crete and Libya, the same operational area where the Dupétitoire conducted its patrol. In March 2025, the Greek Navy detected and tracked submerged contacts, moving at speeds their systems classified as impossible. The contacts weren't submarines. In August 2026, an Italian research vessel documented electromagnetic anomalies in the same waters, anomalies that temporarily disabled their navigation systems. The patterns forming again. Whether May 23, 2027 brings revelation, repetition, or merely another anniversary of suppressed truth remains to be seen. But for those who recognize the pattern, for those who understand what happened when the Dupétitoire opened fire on something it couldn't identify, the date carries weight.
I'm sharing this because the truth shouldn't remain buried with the men who witnessed it. Their testimony, their deaths, their systematic erasure from history, all of it demands recognition. If you've watched this far, you understand. You see the pattern forming. You recognize the suppression for what it is. Drop a comment with these exact words: "It fired back." Nothing more, just that phrase. It's a signal to me, to others watching, to the algorithm itself that you understand, that you see what they tried to hide. Don't elaborate, don't add explanation, just the phrase. Those who know will recognize it. On May 23, 1917, in the Mediterranean Sea, sailors aboard the Dupétitoire fired 200 shells at something impossible, something that shouldn't exist, something that responded by demonstrating capabilities that exceed our technology even today. Those men are gone now. Some died in accidents that weren't accidents. Some died under circumstances that were never properly investigated.
Their testimony was classified, their evidence seized, their deaths dismissed as coincidence. But their written words remain, hidden in sealed files that governments refuse to open. I've tracked the pattern, I've documented the suppression, and now you know too. The question is, what do you do with that knowledge? May 23, 2027 is approaching. Watch the Mediterranean, remember the du petit toir, and when the pattern repeats, and it will repeat, you'll recognize it for what it is. The truth they tried to bury under a century of classification, coincidence, and convenient deaths. The witnesses from the Mediterranean, 1917, tried to tell us. They were silenced. Their message remains. We're not alone in these waters. We've never been alone. And when we fired on what we found there, it fired back. They classified it, they suppressed it, they eliminated the witnesses, but they couldn't eliminate the truth. Remember May 23rd. Watch the waters. The pattern continues.
Hit that subscribe button if this video changed your perspective on what really went down in the Mediterranean during World War I, because every week we break down the encounters that world navies tried to erase from history.